The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hey, welcome along on tonight's Mark Steyn Show. You know how every 48 hours one of these damning reports comes out about child rape gangs having the run of yet another English town for years on end, and the town says, yes, well, all a bit embarrassing, but lessons have been learned and it won't be happening anymore. Well, in Oldham, the authorities are still protecting the perpetrators and still taking it out on the victims. We'll get into that with Oldham councillor Brian Hobin. We don't say Asian rape gangs, by the way, because it's unfair to Hindus and Buddhists and Azerbaijanis and Bhutanese and all manner of other people, adding up to 2/3 of the world's population. So the term Asian isn't actually any use. These are gangs from a much narrower and more specific demographic. I'll wait a moment on that because I like to hold off the Ofcom complaints until at least 5 to 10 minutes into the show. We have breaking news on the trans front. The Tavistock Clinic, which can transition your kid and get him, her back to you by tea time with a full set of new pronouns, is being put out of the trans business. Debbie Hayton's here on that. I believe it was Christopher Bullock in his smash hit show of 1716, The Cobbler of Preston. It was the Mamma Mia of its day. I believe it was he who first formulated the old saw that nothing is certain except death and taxes. Thanks to Rishi, there's a lot more tax than there used to be. And in the last couple of years, there's a lot more death. Why is that? We'll dig deep with our statsman, Jamie Jenkins. Oh, let's just cut to the chase. All the people who are running the world are nuts, but Leilani Dowding isn't, and she's here too. Plus the most vital part of the show, all the more important when we live in the constant swirl of a blizzard of lies. Your comments and questions, do send them along by email to gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can Twitter me at gbnews. But first, as ever, the latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Mark Steyn, thank you. Good evening to you. The latest news headlines this hour. Conservative leadership candidates Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are currently going head-to-head again in Leeds at the first of 12 Tory hustings. So far, they've both set out their visions for the country and are about to take questions from Conservative Party members. They'll both be hoping to secure votes tonight before their summer tour of the country. More highlights from that head-to-head this evening on GB News. And in other news today, the parents of 12-year-old Archie Battersby have failed to persuade the Supreme Court to stop doctors from ending his life support treatment. They've asked justices to give them more time to carry their fight on, but the request has been refused. Doctors say Archie is clinically brain dead after he went into a coma in April. His mother says she thinks he was attempting an online challenge when he had an accident. A man has been jailed in the first ever televised hearing inside a criminal court in England and Wales. Judge Sarah Monroe QC's comments were streamed live from the Old Bailey this morning, and she made legal history as she handed Ben Oliver a life sentence for killing his grandfather. Unions have announced further rail strikes this Saturday and once again on August the 13th in a dispute over pay. ASLEF says train drivers at 9 companies are set to walk out. It said strikes are a last resort until their pay is in line with inflation. That's after passengers faced yet another day of disruption today due to the aftermath of yesterday's strikes. And workers at Britain's biggest and busiest container port have voted to strike as well, also in a dispute over pay. Members of the Unite Union backed industrial action at Felixstowe in Suffolk by 9-1. The union saying an offer of a 5% pay rise is, in fact, a wage cut because of inflation. And some very sad news. The actor Bernard Cribbins has died at the age of 93. Famous for narrating the children's TV series The Wombles and starring in the film The Railway Children, as well as long-running Doctor Who and all the Carry On films, his career spans 7 decades. Dame Floella Benjamin has been tweeting he was a creative genius, a great storyteller and knew just how to communicate with an audience. Bernard Cribbins, who's died at the age of 93. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, where now it's time for Mark Steyn.
Thank you, Polly. You know, Polly is quite right, everything she said about Bernard Cribbins there. But the thing I love about him, he had a very short pop star career, but he made 2 terrific records, A Hole in the Ground and what's that? Oh, right, said Fred, have to take the door off, that there door is gonna have to go. Terrific stuff. 2 great big hits for Bernard Cribbins. As you know, I very much like that line by the great American writer Ring Lardner from a story of his more or less exactly a century ago. Shut up, he explained. There's a lot of that about. We don't really go in for mission statements and the like on this show, a bit pretentious. But I will say this, when they don't want you talking about something, that's all the more reason to talk about it. Climate change was more or less the pilot program for what's now spread to almost every other area of public policy. Oh, global warming, all the experts are agreed. Really? In that case, then, why is it necessary to stamp out those few who don't agree? Because generally, it's only very weak ideas that can't withstand any criticism. But as goes the climate, so go all manner of other policies now, such as public health. We want justice for those injured and bereaved by the COVID vaccines. Instead, out there on the internet, they're abused and mocked and insulted for no crime other than being widowed or crippled. I'll give you one example from this afternoon. This was in response to our vaccine victims special with people who've lost husbands, parents, children, people with chronic injuries. And in response to Anne and Charlotte and Leanne and Vicky and Claire and all the rest of them, this tough guy tweets, "What a bunch of fakers and complainers, bitching and moaning over a little pinprick. If you get injured by the vaccine, you're better off not being allowed in the gene pool." That's Riggin, who claims to be a 34-year-old gay poet from the outskirts of Surrey. That could all be rubbish, because while towns have outskirts, I'm not sure counties do. But besides that, you can't be a poet if you have no humanity. I was thinking of saying that I would like Riggin to have a bad reaction to his 7th or 8th or 9th booster shot and die slowly in a horribly painful way. But I just checked the Ofcom regulations and you're not allowed to say that. At any rate, the big butch enforcers of Twitter are happy to let Riggin piss on the widowed and the crippled on Twitter all day long. He'll never be banned. But the widows and orphans and the chronically sick get vaporized every minute of the day simply for telling their stories. Wayne Cunnington's vaccine injuries, you've seen him on this show, are apparently fake news. Same with Charlotte Wright, a vaccine widow of 32 years old, and she's a widow, but her widowhood is fake news to Twitter. This is sick and abusive, but increasingly there's an official narrative and that's it. And even minimal dissent from the official narrative can no longer be permitted. That's why our friend Kathy Gingell from the Conservative Woman has now been kicked off Twitter just for taking too great an interest in the personal experience of vaccine victims. Guilt by association. There's a lot of that about. Alison Bailey is a barrister and also a black lesbian, which you'd think would provide some protection from a lot of these ructions. But it's all pretty hierarchical, and right now trans trumps lesbian, so she had to sue her chambers, who decided to screw her over for inclining to the J.K. Rowling view of matters trans. She won, by the way. As I said, all this identity group Rainbow Coalition rubbish obscures the fact that it's all very crudely hierarchical, particularly if you're a woman. Trans trumps lesbian and feminist. And on the ugly streets of towns up and down the spine of England, whether in the industrial north or in the leafy home counties, Muslim trumps women, and indeed Muslim trumps little girls. So mass child sex slavery in Telford, Rotherham, Oldham, Aylesbury is regarded not as a great evil and a moral stain on our society, but as something faintly embarrassing that might complicate all the fluffy bunny, pink unicorn myths of multiculturalism. Tough for the 9, 10, 11-year-old girls on the receiving end, but hey, to modify Queen Victoria's apocryphal line, lie back and think of diversity. It's funny. Our society talks incessantly about how much we care, but we don't care. Not about little raped girls any more than we do about children orphaned by AstraZeneca and all kinds of other things. This is wicked and shameful. In Britain, everything is policed except crime. As Parm Sandhu said on Monday's show, only 1.3% of reported crimes wind up with a charge, a summons, a court appearance, never mind a conviction. If you're lucky, the police are merely useless, but in a distressing number of English towns, the police are not merely useless, but complicit in great evil. It is 6 years since I first met Sammy Woodhouse, whom you've seen often on this show, and her fellow victims of Rotherham's child rape gangs. One of Sammy's friends casually mentioned that the child rape is still going on. You can see the young English girls, she said, being picked up by middle-aged men of Pakistani origin at the local shopping centre. So I went along and I saw it. There are men who enjoy raping children. That's bad. But it is worse when they are able to create networks, organizational structures in plain sight for the industrial scale raping of children. And those networks sit there in plain sight and are tolerated and indeed protected by the police, the politicians, the social workers. That is the situation that we have in too many English towns, in Rotherham and Rochdale, Halifax and Huddersfield, Oxford and Aylesbury, Banbury and Bristol. But the situation in Oldham is especially revolting. The leader of the grooming gang, a chap called Shabir Ahmed, worked for the council for years on end as a, quote, welfare rights officer. He ran his grooming gang out of the welfare office. Another was on the Oldham Youth Council. As we've discussed, because of the callous indifference of the authorities, Oldham is a town where a 12-year-old girl goes into the police station to report that she's been raped by, quote, an Asian male known only as Ali, in the graveyard of Oldham Parish Church. The poor girl gets sloughed off by the desk officer and then, in the lobby of the very police station, is led away by 2 other men, who, along with half a dozen others, rape her again, and again, and again, and again and again, all through the night. Brian Hobin is a councillor in Oldham, elected on the Failsworth Independent Party ticket. They've got 5 members on that council, and they provide some vigorous opposition to a council that otherwise would be sweeping an awful lot of things under the carpet. And Brian joins me now. Brian, just tell us a bit about Sophie, who is the 12-year-old girl who was led away by those guys from the police station in Oldham, and she was actually present at the meeting the other night with you, the council meeting.
She has. She's been present at both the meetings recently. We, as a team, have come to know Samantha, as she wants to now be called, a real name. And it's quite distressing when you hear firsthand what's gone on. And it's even more distressing when you find out the authorities are wanting to push back against any kind of inquiry into why and how that did go on and why people allowed it to go on.
Now, about a month ago, there was a report on this is where most of us first heard of this young lady and what happened to her that night. But she wasn't actually supposed to be interviewed by the guys doing the inquiry. And there seems to be a question as to whether or not it was the council or the social workers who decided, for reasons of their own, that she shouldn't be made available to them.
And this is one of the reasons that we are pushing for a full public inquiry, to find out the answers to the review itself. The review threw up lots of unanswered questions that remain now, and we feel that only a full inquiry will find them answers. Because, as you say, it seems to have been led by the council, fed into by the council, and with all respect to Newsom and Ridgway that did the review, they may have done a very good job, but on the very narrow constraints that they had, without being able to look further, how can we trust the review? Especially when 11 victims were put forward for the council for the review to look into. Of them 11 victims, I think the council made a mistake, really, because one of them was Samantha, and she wasn't going to go away.
No.
So, of them 11 victims, there was only Samantha, really, that got the chance to be interviewed, and that was because of her and the assistance of Maggie Oliver that pushed her to the forefront. Otherwise, we'd have ended up with a review with no victims at all interviewed.
Well, and the other interesting thing about it, when you read that report, is the number, they're referred to only as Councillor X, Councillor P, Councillor U, Councillor L, but there's actually quite an interesting number of councillors who are the subject whose behaviour and whose proclivities are the subject of this report. So the council itself is hopelessly conflicted in a way, because they're protecting friends and colleagues and all kinds of other people.
Which is all the more reason to open it up. How can we ever move forward without digging deep and ridding the council of this cancer that sits there? We don't know how deep it sits until we have a full public inquiry, and we don't know how high it goes, because we've got MPs that served within the local council, sitting MPs now. So how high does it go? We've got whistleblowers that are willing to come forward, but they don't know who to come forward to, because who can they trust?
Now, the council has reacted to this by doing something that I think most people would have thought is quite extraordinary, that people went along to this council meeting and they got annoyed and they got angry and they started barracking and they started booing. And the council and Greater Manchester Police have now served them with ASBOs, including actually young Samantha's mum. I believe she's one of the people who's been given an ASBO.
And that raises questions as well, because already the Chief Constable has distanced himself from these letters that have gone out.
Yeah, not terribly convincingly.
and there's no...
His badge, the badge of Greater Manchester Police, is on the top of that letterhead. So when he said, oh, this is nothing to do with me, some bloke just broke into Greater Manchester Police headquarters and stole all our letterheads, it's not really very convincing, is it?
No, and I understand to a certain extent how the council want to have health and safety measures in place that things don't happen to people in the chamber. But I do think it's going a bit too far. And if questions had been answered over the 3 years that we've been pushing for an inquiry, and if we'd have got towards an inquiry, these people wouldn't be so angry. They're not having their questions answered. And that's half of the reason why they're angry.
Why do you think that there is this appearance of a cover-up, that the most powerful people in the community in Oldham are in effect trying to brush aside the most evil acts imaginable? Why are they doing that?
I would hazard a guess, Mark, and say it was politics, and it was people that wanted to keep the positions and keep the jobs. And I think to some people, young, white, working class girls are a price worth paying. I really do think that
it's as cold a calculation as that.
I really do think that's where it lies.
In Rotherham, the girls told me that the police and the politicians and the social workers just dismiss them as, quote, white slags and, quote, packy shaggers. And you think that's exactly the same in Oldham, in effect?
I think it's got to be along them lines. It really has, because we know the demographics of the people that are doing it, and we know the demographics mainly of the victims, and that's, it just proves the point that some people are willing to turn a blind eye, I think, to secure votes.
So in other words, the Labour Party, because that's who runs this town and most of the others, the Labour Party prioritises not offending the Pakistani community or the Muslim community over these poor girls who have been raped and had all kinds of terrible experiences.
If we look at the areas that are up and down the country, which you say rightly are predominantly Labour, then you've got to say that that's got to be part of the factor.
What can public pressure be brought to bear on it? I mean, I take it these ASBOs are grotesquely offensive, because what they're basically telling the people of Oldham is there is no way you can exercise your right to protest, because the council and the police will single you out, hunt you down, and in effect give you a pseudo-criminal record over this.
Well, and the hunt you down is something that has been brought to my attention today, because the carer for Samantha received hers by recorded delivery. And she's never given her address to anybody in authority, because she's had to move because of threats against her, because she's put this at the forefront. So where has that address come from for the authorities to send one of these unsigned letters is another question.
So you're saying that, in fact, they're able to access, because this is the same thing that happened to a young lady we had on the show in Telford, that the authorities are able to access what's supposed to be a highly confidential database, find out where you are, and get to you.
And it's things like this, yes, I think that's the case, but it's things like this, the desperation of these people to stop you having an inquiry and to stop finding the truth, makes you even more think that there's something worth digging for there.
Yeah.
Because we've had members of our team and members of our supporters have been through hell the last 3 years while we've been pushing this. We've had a leader of the council in his role trying to get people sacked from the jobs just for challenging. So what kind of more desperate measures are these people going to take to try and stop us trying to get the truth out there?
Well, as I said, the thing that's striking about the report is once they start talking about Councillor A, Councillor B, Councillor F, Councillor K, and you start thinking, wait a minute, how many of these councillors, to one degree or another, are mixed up in it, or are the friends of the people who are mixed up in it?
And that's why a public inquiry, we feel, is needed, because whichever desk a piece of paper has gone across, if you've seen it and done nothing about it, then you're complicit with the whole thing, in our opinion. And then those people need bringing to book just as much as the perpetrators need bringing to book, to give justice right across the scale to all the victims.
Yeah, no, you're right. You know, the left always say when you're talking about whatever, transgender rights or whatever, silence is violence. Well, the silence of the Oldham establishment is literally violence for people on the receiving end, like Samantha. How's she holding up under all this?
She's a very strong, a very brave girl. And as I said before, if it hadn't been for her determination, her and Maggie Oliver, pushing her to the front, that would be another victim that had never had her voice heard.
No. Well, the thing about Maggie Oliver is when she saw how this was going from the inside, she quit the police because she found what they were doing so offensive. And we say that and we're all impressed by it, but you wonder why it's only her. Why aren't there, 3 dozen more? Why aren't there people in Oldham Council, Oldham Welfare, Oldham Social Services? I should point out that we have had a response from Rob Marshall, the communications manager of Oldham Council, and they say, we are deeply sorry to Sophie, that's Samantha. for the failings outlined in the report. We were keen that Sophie's case be looked at as part of the review, so they're disagreeing with you. And they're saying, when asked to seek her involvement again, the professionals working directly with Sophie advised against contact at that time. So the council are throwing the social workers under the bus. So you have driven a wedge between the various levels of officialdom there. Thank you very much for that, Brian. We are going to stay on this thing because I'm absolutely disgusted with this. These ASBOs are worthless. Nobody should be getting the idea that the mother of a girl who gets gang raped because she's seized in the lobby of the Oldham police station, taken away, and has 8 men rape her until there's nothing left of her, and then they kick her out the following morning. The idea that the mum gets served with an ASBO for bringing that up at a public meeting is absolutely disgraceful, even by Oldham standards, even by Greater Manchester standards. Thank you very much for joining us, Brian. We're going to carry on with some more on this story next week. Your reaction up next, GBViews at GBNews.com. And our stats man is back, Jamie Jenkins. And 2 words to brighten your day, Leilani Dowding. Stick around, we're coming right back.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Just ahead of your comments, I rise on a point of personal privilege, as the parliamentarians say. Did you see this story in The Guardian by Jim Waterson, media editor? There we go. GB News faces Ofcom investigation over hosts' COVID booster claims. I did enjoy reading this story. Here's a sample quote. Steyn is based outside the UK and often broadcasts from his home in Canada. That's my home in Canada, just across the river. In fact, that's the St. Lawrence River over there. And if you've got the big screen TV, you can see the whales plashing just on the other side of the bit. And then you see that big tower that I've got. I thought it's a bit flashy, but I thought I'd have it put in. When you're having a house built, you don't want to stint on this stuff. That big tower in the back, there's around the back of it, you can, if you look carefully, you can just see a herd of moose grazing, because that's my home in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Genius Guardian man. Just for the record, we've done, I don't know what it is now, 150 shows, something like that, and we haven't done a single show from the Dominion of Canada. But that's not the point that was most interesting about his thing. Just can we just wind that back? So I want to get the exact quote here. Presented an hour-long Victims of the Vax special for GB News, in which he interviewed people who blamed the death of family members on COVID jabs, says Jim Waterson. And Heidi Katrina, who is one of the victims of the vaccine, clarified that, as she put it, not just blamed, but medically diagnosed and confirmed by death certificates, I might add. So I just want to explain this for the benefit of this media editor guy at The Guardian. The people we had on our show, they have death certificates, they have coroner's verdicts, they have medical diagnoses from their doctors, they have six-figure checks from Her Majesty's government, in which the government concedes that they were damaged by the vaccines. A majority of the first people to be notified that they were going to be paid were in fact guests on this show. The very first one, she told me just yesterday that she got her check a couple of days ago. So what The Guardian is actually saying here is that on the one hand, these people have death certificates, coroner's verdicts, medical diagnoses and six-figure checks from the government of the United Kingdom, but because it conflicts with the propaganda, we at The Guardian, we at Full Fact, fully funded by American billionaires to destroy British free speech, we at Ofcom have to work even harder to protect the propaganda. That's all this show did. We noticed a few months ago that the propaganda and reality were beginning to diverge. And that divergence has only widened in the last 3 or 4 months, so it's now like a huge, yawning, gaping chasm. And what's he called? Chumpy McArse-Pants at The Guardian and Full Fact and Ofcom are all still protecting the propaganda, hanging off the propaganda like Monica Lewinsky on Bill Clinton's zipper. It's pathetic. It's not me. It's reality. Coroner's certificates, checks from the government versus you losers still propping up the exhausted propaganda. GB News is the people's channel, so let's hear what the people have to say about these grooming gangs. Will they ever get justice? Charlie says, sadly not, because the neglect and abuse is too multi-layered from social services, police and politicians that they'd never throw themselves under a bus that we expect them to drive. Yeah, they're basically being asked to throw themselves under their own bus, aren't they? Brexit Ed says, not whilst it's a taboo subject in Parliament and with the mainstream media. Stephen says, no, too many cover-ups. The lead came from Keir Starmer failing to act on Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile has the advantage of being, you know, this is the interesting thing. These gang rapes are going on night after night after night after night in English towns, and nobody does anything about it. But if you happen to cop a feel of a schoolgirl for 45 seconds on Top of the Pops in 1968 while you were hosting Midday Spin on Radio 1, then they will take you to court for that. It's very interesting the way these things work. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Deputy Leader of the Free World.
I am Kamala Harris. My pronouns are she and her. I am a woman sitting at the table wearing a blue suit.
Okay, what's going on? Our pal Leilani Dowding is here. Leilani, you were very taken by Mrs. Harris and that clip.
Well, first of all, I'm Leilani Dowding. I'm a woman. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm here, sat in front of you in pink and white. So.
I don't. You can't be a woman. I'm the woman here. I've got a slight touch of 5 o'clock shadow, but otherwise I'm a woman in a dark suit. So, you know, the thing about this is we look at this. It's like ridiculous. She's still wearing the stupid mask. It's almost like a perfect précis of how pathetic and irrelevant the Western world is in mid-2022.
I feel like the world's gone completely and utterly insane, and this has got to be like some kind of sideshow to cover up for their complete and utter incompetence of trying to run America right now, because it's just, I'm a US citizen. I was there for 17 years, and the whole country has just gone downhill. But, you know, same thing over here with the nonsense that's over here right now and the insanity going on in our media.
Yeah, and you have to bet that when our enemies look at it, whether you're talking about the Chinese or the Iranians or even just those goat herds in Afghanistan, they must be looking at the leadership of the West and just laughing their socks off.
They honestly have to be. I mean, we're hardly, you know, a nation to be afraid of anymore, are we? And America certainly isn't. It's become a joke. It's a complete and utter joke right now. It's really sad to see. And it's not just, you know, the pronouns or the what is a woman thing. It's everything. It's the insanity like we've had the last 2 weeks and the fear-mongering over a bit of hot weather from that to, you know, pushing people to eat crickets. It's just everything going on right now.
But, you know, it's funny, like the pronoun thing started as a joke, and then suddenly the vice president, so-called, of the United States is announcing her pronouns. And I wonder if when it comes to eating the crickets and the cockroaches and all the rest of it, that's like a joke now. But I wonder if you were to check back with us in 3, 4, 5 years' time, and I'd be saying, oh, Leilani, after the show, let's go out and have a cockroach bolognese at the local Italian, you know?
Well, Robert Downey Jr. just did it. Nicole Kidman was promoting eating them. The WEF and you know, they're trying to promote it all, and then when you actually look at some of the literature behind what they're doing, they're actually saying it's due to climate change and lower yields in crops because of climate change. Nothing at all to do with the fuel prices or what they're doing with fertiliser and farmers or anything like that. Of course, it's, you know, climate change. You've got to go and eat crickets now. But it seems like it's something that they're, you know, they have been trying to push. And the weird thing is you know, my mum's from the Philippines, so she's actually eaten insects. I've seen her eat insects from when I was young. So that didn't freak me out. But what it is seeing the way there's been blanket media coverage about it. These celebrities have been pushing it. Then you couple it in with the government overreach to the farmers in the Netherlands. Trudeau stepped in, and he's now, you know, telling farmers how to run their farms. When you couple it in with that, it does become a little bit. You can see there is a sinister agenda going on. You know, and then saying it's because of climate change, which is not. No. You know, it's sinister.
Well, what the thing is, they'll ruin the food supply, and people will starve. There won't be food for people, and then they'll say, oh well, that proves what we were saying was correct all along, that it's the climate change. So they win either way.
Yeah. You know, meanwhile, they'll blame Ukraine, they'll blame everything else, but they won't look at what's happening. You know, farmers need to plough their fields, farmers need to go and sow their seeds, and they need to harvest it all. And they can't do that inexpensively with the way the fuel prices are for them now.
No, they're just the last 2 years haven't been bad enough, so we got to intervene again to make them even worse. Thank you, Leilani. It's always great to see you, and I'm relieved to find you still identify as a woman, because I find these days, I mean, I didn't realise there were any of the old kind of fashion kind of woman left, because it mostly seems to be the other kind these days. Anyway, we talked about excess deaths yesterday. That's to say, there are more of your fellow Englishmen, Scots, Irish, Welsh who are dead than there should be. And it's not from the COVID. For the last 3 months in England and Wales, there's been just shy of 1,000 extra deaths every week. As I said in response to a viewer fighting vainly the old ennui, that's about as basic a public health matter as exists. We're not talking about waiting lists. The wait is over. They're dead. They've joined the great majority, the choir celestial. And it would be nice to know why that is, but no one in our government seems terribly interested. Instead, our new health secretary is saying, don't forget to sign up for this week's booster. It will provide you with protection against COVID until... about 20 minutes from now, about 2 minutes before Dan Wootton comes on. It'll be good till then. According to the government, 93% of the population is vaccinated. According to the self-same government, of the 5,678 dead from COVID in April and May, 5,276 were vaccinated. So the vaccinated now account for 93% of COVID fatalities. And they also account for 93% of the general population, which kind of sounds like the vaccine provides no protection whatsoever against the COVID. As I said, these are all the government's numbers. Nothing to do with me. But let's kick it around with Jamie Jenkins, formerly of the Office for National Statistics. Jamie, what do you make of this?
Yeah, evening, Mark. So I think that report that you just put up there, I kind of been reading that myself the last 24 hours. A few people have sent me a link to that. And what they've done is they've looked at a publication from the ONS a few weeks back, which looks at deaths by vaccination status. So what they do there is they link the vaccination records to the death records that we've got, and then they can estimate these deaths by vaccination status. And then they looked at the proportion of people who are vaccinated, as you said. Now, they've taken that from the government dashboard. Now, I'm not quite sure why they needed to do that, because actually in the same ONS release, they broke it down by age and vaccination status. And I think when you're doing these comparisons, Mark, I think we've spoken in the past, it's always best to do it by looking at the age groups and age standardized. And that's exactly what the ONS have done. So I've had a look into the report for you, and I'll just give you some of the highlights from that. Now, firstly, it's probably worth reiterating that deaths are far lower now than they were in the past. Regardless of anybody's vaccination status, fewer people are dying because we're in that part of the pandemic. We've got less deadly variants, and this kind of how the virus generally evolves through a pandemic. The virus isn't going to survive if it kills everybody. So what I've looked at then is they don't publish any death rates for anybody up to the age of 39 when you compare vaccination status. That is, Mark, because there's so few deaths in younger people, you can't get any reliable estimates to compare the death rate for people by vaccination status. Now, if we take the latest month's worth of data that they've published, so that's May 2022, again, we've got much fewer deaths in, say, the population aged 40 to 69 than we've had in the past. But I think it's kind of corroborates with what the chart that you've just shown there is, that there's little difference in the actual death rate when you look at it by age group and you standardize for age between vaccination status. So unvaccinated, they've got a similar death rate to those who are vaccinated in those who are 40 to 49, 50 to 59, and 60 to 69. But where you do start to see the difference, Mark, is in the all elderly people. And we know that COVID continues to be that kind of virus that predominantly kills the elderly. So as with other vaccinations, they tend to work better for the elderly people. So unless, when you start getting over the age of 70 and you compare people who are over 70 and have not been vaccinated, and again, we don't know the reasons people don't have the vaccination. Sometimes people don't have vaccinations because they're so ill that the vaccine can't be given to them. So people over the age of 70, if you're unvaccinated, you are more likely to die statistically if you haven't had the vaccine compared to people who have had the booster in May 2022. But interestingly, Mark, those people who had 2 vaccines, who thought that was the original full vaccination dose, they are just as likely to have died with the death rates as those who are unvaccinated. So I think the lessons that we can take from the information that we've got from the ONS is that obviously there is an effect for older people, but pushing the vaccine like they did last winter all the way down to the age of 18, probably unnecessary. Remember, there'll be some people under the age of 70 who are clinically vulnerable, which obviously there would be that additional benefit from. But mass population vaccination, when you're looking at the latest data from the ONS and the current variants we got, doesn't seem sensible and cost effective.
Now, you've had a look at the numbers in other nations as well, the Netherlands and various other places, and it's pretty much the same thing there. Is it correct to say that the idea of a mass vaccination for everybody in the population. You know, Klaus Schwab at Davos says if unless everyone is vaccinated, no one is safe. Is that true? Or if you are under 70 and good health, good luck to you. You don't necessarily, it doesn't do anything for you, this thing.
Well, no, I think he's talking absolute nonsense, Mark, because the data is the facts, and that's what the ONS data is showing. Obviously, people who are kind of more vulnerable, and I believe in the choice with the vaccination. You know, with the flu vaccines in the past, people who are not in the vulnerable groups, they can go and pay for their own vaccines if they want to come forward. But we know these vaccines don't stop people catching the virus, which is why it's nonsensical that America is still asking people to have had at least 2 vaccinations to go into the country, and we still have that kind of predominant problem now with Novak Djokovic not being able to go in for the US Open, partly because of that, even though he couldn't play in Australia last year, Mark. But he could go into Australia now. I think he might be banned from going in for a couple of years, but the vaccination status doesn't stop him. So if the vaccine stopped you catching the virus, yes, it would obviously have that benefit, but it doesn't stop you catching the virus. So vaccinations for all, I don't think it's cost effective at all, basically.
Well, no, you're absolutely right to mention Djokovic. He can't play at the US Open because he's regarded as a public health menace because he's unvaccinated. But Joe Biden got the COVID. He's boosted and boosted and boosted, but he got the COVID from someone else who's boosted and boosted and boosted. So there's no science behind any of this at all. It seems to be in the realm of myth now. Thank you very much for that, Jamie. We always I can sometimes get a little far out on the branch with some of this statistical analysis. You always tell me just how far to go and then saw it off just as I'm about to drop to earth. So I appreciate that. Stump the Stein is looming. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Plus, you've got a confused 10-year-old daughter who's anxious to transition into a confused 10-year-old son. The Tavistock Clinic is the express check-in for drive-through kids menu transitioning, or it was until just a few hours ago when the NHS decided to announce they're closing it down. What's up with that? Debbie Hayton is here. Don't touch that dial. We're coming right back.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
The Tavistock Clinic is the place to go if you want to be gender affirming about your crazy mixed up kid. They'll whip out the puberty blockers, lop off any extruding parts Junior no longer wants, whether top or bottom, and you'll have a brand new, healthy, well-adjusted kid in nothing flat. Well, that was the theory. Now the NHS has decided that the Tavistock's, quote, unquestioning affirmative approach is not necessarily in the children's best interest, indeed is, quote, not safe for them. So they're putting the Tavistock out of the trans business. Debbie Hayton is a teacher and is transsexual. I'm not being transphobic because that actually is the term that Debbie personally prefers. She's going old school on that stuff, and I incline that way myself too when it comes to these terms. So what do you make of this announcement about the Tavistock, Debbie?
It's not before time, Mark. Staff have been blowing the whistle at the Tavistock for years. The whistles have become a cacophony, and finally somebody's taken notice and said enough is enough. The Tavistock is not fit for purpose. It needs to be closed down.
What's the idea behind just taking a 10-year-old who is not a normal 10-year-old in the sense that they're happy playing with dollies or playing with G.I. Joe or whatever, has some confusion, and just immediately coming up with the most extreme solution to their problems?
Well, it's wrong and it's inappropriate. There's often children with complex and multiple issues that they're struggling with, but the moment the label is slapped on them that this is a trans child, then suddenly they're treated differently. Suddenly they're not treated properly by local mental health services. They're, as people have said, they're shipped off to the TAVI to be treated at the TAVI as some separate group, which is totally inappropriate. These are children.
They've had, they've had at least one famous whistleblower there. But there are a lot of people who seem, and in the medical profession, there must be disquiet about this. But people seem to look at what happens to very famous women like J.K. Rowling, and they figure that it's in their own interest just to keep quiet.
Or move on. You know, the Tavistock has had a problem with staff moving on. Staff retention has been an issue for them because members of staff look at what's happening and they don't like it, and they don't want to be part of it. This has been talked about for a long time.
But at the same time, the idea that there's no minimum age at which you... I mean, I don't know what you were like as a 10-year-old, as a 9-year-old, or as an 8-year-old, but do you think it would have been good for you if you had transitioned at 6, 7, 8 or 9?
No, not at all. No. And this is the thing that frightens me. You see, I'm somebody who has transitioned and I've made the best of it since I transitioned. But I did that as an adult. When I knew what it meant to be an adult, I'd had all the children that I wanted to, so I'd had all that, and then I transitioned. If I transitioned at 6, 7 and 8, how would I fit into society? How would I have formed relationships? How would I have children of my own, which my pride and joy? None of these questions have got answers. Instead, we're crossing our fingers and hoping for the best for these children.
There's a sad aspect to what becomes, for adolescents, bodily mutilation. And there are websites all over the place now in which young girls who decide that they're boys actually put up on Instagram and TikTok their breast scars. They're 14, 15, 16. They have their breasts removed, and they have this scar midway across their chest, and they put up the photographs of these scars as if it's life-affirming. Is it?
I don't see how it can be. It just seems to me like a craze that teenage girls are doing this and then promoting this, and it then becomes like a domino effect. But nobody's been asking the question, what's really going on here, apart from saying these children are trans, which isn't an explanation for anything. It's explaining a problem away. These children have got often complex and multiple mental health conditions, and we need to be investigating and exploring those conditions, not just saying you're trans, here's some hormones.
Well, and it also doesn't explain. I mean, the Tavistock business has boomed in the last few years. I think it used to get something like 117 customers a year, and it's now gone up to thousands and thousands. So they're becoming, suddenly they found themselves like the McDonald's or the Burger King of fast-track transitioning. Drive-through transitioning, really. Oughtn't that in itself to tell you there's something wrong and we are dealing with some crude social phenomenon rather than a sudden desire of everybody to change the sex they were born with.
Well, there was two things that happened. One was the absolute numbers, what you've said, but the other one was the sex ratio. Historically, most children coming forward were boys struggling. But suddenly, the number of girls increased faster, and the number of girls then surpassed the number of boys. What's happening here? The Tavistock wasn't doing the research to ask the questions why. It was just simply saying there's more children coming forwards. Let's treat them, rather than saying what's actually happening here. What are the underlying social conditions which are leading to this quite remarkable and bizarre situation?
Because the way I heard it, it was always like 9 boys wanted to be girls for every 1 girl who wanted to be a boy, and that sort of comports with my own experience in these things, just, you know, which isn't scientific at all. Why do you think girls now want to be boys?
Well, I'm not sure they want to be boys. They don't want to be girls. This is the situation. You're a teenage girl growing up, and it's always been an issue. Boys have carried on doing things where girls have been expected to not do those things, perhaps. Well, if you can pretend to opt out of being a girl, it might be an attractive.
Yeah, there's a lot of unhappy people around, but actually bodily mutilation is not necessarily the answer to this. I think on the whole it's a good thing that the Tavistock is being put out of this business. We'll see how that works out. Thank you very much, Debbie, and we'll close it out. I don't know, have we got time for a bit of stumping? We can do, what's this question here? Why this is he, that's me, why is he being investigated by Ofcom for spreading COVID vaccine misinformation? Well, I think the reason I'm being investigated is because Britain has an over-regulated media environment. I don't personally think Ofcom should be in the business of editorial regulation. I'm rather sad to see Michael Grade, who was a semi-competent light entertainment executive, eking out his final days as the United Kingdom's chief censor. I don't think that's... We've asked him on the show. He doesn't want to come on and discuss any of these stuff. They've made him the Earl of Ofcom or something now. OK, that is going to do it for us. Dan Wooden's here to thump your Thursday like nobody's business. What you got, Dan?
That was a great riposte to The Guardian and full fact. Mark, I much enjoyed it. But look, we're actually going to be leading today on the conversation that you just had with Debbie about the Tavistock Clinic. So an incredible story of Richie Heron. Now, Richie is currently suing the NHS because he underwent life-changing mutilation in the view of many, which he now regrets. This is another landmark case. It wasn't actually at the Tavistock Clinic, so it shows that there is a big issue across the NHS. Maya Forstater of Sex Matters, a big ally of J.K. Rowling, she's here on this tonight as well. And big division on my superstar panel. We've got the Daily Mail's Sarah Vine, Conservative commentator Dominique Samuels, and the journalist Amy Nicallon. I have a feeling that's going to be a heated discussion, Mark.
Yeah, that is going to be super explosive. It's so weird that it just happens now at your local hospital. It's not so long that you had to go off to clinics in Morocco and Mexico to have this done. And now it's happening just down the road. Great stuff, Dan. That's all coming up after the weather. I got no plans to transition anytime. I don't think it would work out for me. Certainly not if I got it done on the NHS. Stay safe, stay free.
Hello there, my name's Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast. It is looking mostly dry over the next 24 hours or so across the UK. There will be some showers and it stays on the warm side for many of us. High pressure just about holding on for the next 24 hours. However, as we move into the weekend, that slips away. It allows weather systems to move in from the Atlantic, bringing outbreaks of rain and stronger winds to some of us as well. For the rest of Thursday evening, though, a quiet end to the day. 1 or 2 heavy showers, though, still possible across parts of Dumfries and Galloway up into the Borders region. These